But that said, last week we closed a series. Next week we're starting a series. That left us with kind of a weird, we can actually do whatever we want this week. So that was dangerous. We're like, man, what do we get to concoct up this week? But it was also exciting. And we're going to spend some time celebrating fathers. But more than that, we're going to spend time just celebrating parents and celebrating kids. And I thought, so that means this morning's going to look a little bit different. It's not going to be a standard, one guy up here doing a message type of thing. We're going to have a conversation, and we're going to go on a journey this morning all about parenting. But Dan and I were talking, and we just kind of thought, or me specifically thought, there's no one better to talk about parenting than having a conversation with a dad who has 35 years of parenting experience and 8 years of grandparenting experience. And so even as I already said, we don't have all the answers this morning, but we're just going to go on a little journey and see where it takes us all about this idea of parenting, since today is Father's Day. So with that said, Dan, we obviously know and we love you as a leader, as a pastor, and maybe more importantly as a friend, especially to me and Cricket. But tell us a little bit about your family life. Tell us a little bit about your kids, about your grandkids. What has that experience been like for you?
I have five children. My oldest is 35, almost 36. My youngest child is Molly. She's 21. She serves over in the children's area. If you've gotten to know Molly, she's sweet as can be. She's a little challenged in some ways, cognitively, and so she brings a dynamic to our family that we wouldn't have if it wasn't for Molly. She's very, very sweet. So I have two older daughters. I don't remember exactly their ages. I wish I could lose pounds the way I lose memories. You know how that goes. I have my second daughter lives in Fairbanks. My oldest daughter has 3 grandchildren that we get a chance to see all the time. 8, 6, and 3, I think, are their ages. And then Amy and her husband live in Fairbanks, and they have 3, which I think are 6, 4, and no. Kathy, help me out. 4, 2, and 1. Okay. Then my son James is in med school down in Washington, and he has a little boy that's not yet quite 2, and so that's 7 grandkids. And then Andrew is our oldest adopted son. He's fishing outside the Aleutian chain this summer, hopefully making a lot of money. He's sort of, in some ways, Andrew is the sharpest of all my kids. He's also the most prodigal. You know what I mean? So we've had a lot of experience. I thought I was a good parent until we adopted. And parenting adopted children is so different than parenting your own biological children. I think we were surprised by how different it really was. So that's our family. And most of what I've learned by doing it wrong.
Yeah, and we talked about that strategically this week, and you told me, and we'll just kind of get right into the meat of it, I guess, if you will. You told me 3 things that you learned the hard way, or that it took a tough experience to learn these 3 things about parenting. These 3 things were, you may have to remind me what they were. Oops.
Well, presence, I can tell.
Permission, and perspective.
Yeah,
right? Presence, permission, and perspective. And we're going to spend some time in each one of those 3 things, but introduce us to this idea of presence. Maybe not only how you learned it the hard way,
right,
but what that means to you.
Right. Presence, when we talk about presence, you don't ever want to overestimate or underestimate. You don't want to underestimate the importance of being present, of being there. If you think biblically, the fatherhood of God, God communicated truth for generations prior to the coming of Jesus. But until he was present among us, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, pitched his tent among us, we did not behold the glory full of grace and truth. We may have seen truth, but people missed grace. It was the presence of Jesus among us that rubbed off the things that cannot be taught in a scroll. And the same thing is true of fathering. If you think about it, there's a sense in which in our lifetime we've experienced the results of a massive shift sociologically. See, prior to the Industrial Revolution, most men were farmers or workers in the fields or workers in the forest. And particularly with their sons went to work with them as soon as they were old enough to make a contribution. So kids worked with dad in the fields, things like that. And because of that, they were constantly present. And what they received from their father was both his teaching and his temperament, right? All sides of his temperament. The good stuff, the bad stuff, the harsh stuff, the gentle stuff. But they were with him all the time. And the Industrial Revolution changed all that because now dad is going to work in the city in a factory where his kids cannot be a part of it. So dad comes home and the kids still get they don't get his teaching. Teaching is left up to mom now. They don't get his teaching, but they get his temperament. And they get his temperament when he's tired. How's that work for all of you? See, that was the experience with my father. My father was a chef. Now, he died before I was old enough really to work with him in the kitchen. But dad would come home. When he was home, he was tired. He was in the home, but he was never present. So I don't remember his teaching. I don't remember him training me. I just remember the impatience. Some of you may be like me. You remember the look on his face. My dad owned his own restaurant, so he would take just a week off each year. Just took a week. And I think he felt obligated to take his 2 boys with him. My brother was 10 or so, I was 8. My brother was the one who was coordinated. I was the clumsy one that steps on rods and stuff like that. And we'd go fishing for a week. I'd get sick for 2 weeks prior to that vacation because I knew what was going to happen. See, when you take an 8-year-old fishing, you're not going fishing, you're going line untangling. Right? That's what you're doing. And I just remember the look on my father's face. And once again, it's temperament, impatience. The Apostle Paul in Ephesians chapter 6, he has this to say. He says, children, I shared this verse, although it's not what I'm going to comment on, but I want the kids to hear it. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for that's right. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise that it may go well with you and that you may live long in the land, right? But then it says, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and the instruction of the Lord. So for a child, what is the opposite of getting their father's instruction? What's the opposite? What's the text say? It's up in front of you, isn't it? Huh? It provokes them to anger. And people say, well, how does that work? Well, here's how that works. If you don't get the things you need from your father and you're not prepared for life, it makes you angry. You know, my dad died when I was 15, and prior to that time, he's just never present. I don't ever remember my father saying he loved me or he was proud of me. Dad never taught me how to change the oil in a car. I remember I was 16 years old, and the neighbor girl, who was kind of sweet on me, asked me to help change the oil in her car. I'm laying underneath the car. I don't even know where the stupid nut is that you pull out to drain the oil. I know nothing about it. And I'm laying there trying to fake my way through it. And it made me angry. I got angry, frustrated. And that's things with a car. Now you're going out with a girl who's the strangest thing you've ever been with in your life. And dad has never told you how to connect with a girl, how to treat a woman, how God expects a young man to behave in certain settings, and you do everything stupidly, and it makes you mad. See, the answer to anger in the younger generation is presence. It's being present, really present with them. Man, I wish I'd have done a better job of that with my 22-year-old adopted son. He was hard to be with. He always holding me at arm's length. He'd be hard to be with. And so I'd retreat. I should have pursued. Got to be present. So that's the first thing I'd say. Do not lie to yourselves, whether men or women. You cannot parent from a distance. You cannot do it part-time. And no one else can do it for you. You have to be present.
There's so much richness in that, but I think there's also so much tension in that, primarily because, I mean, as a pastor, you were working at one point, I'm sure, 60 plus hours a week. And then at the same time, as a pastor, you're leading families and, leading dads and leading moms and saying you have to be present with your children. And you were probably struggling with that more than a lot of people were, just because of the duties of the job. So what did that look like for you? And I'm sure we have people out here who are working 50 plus hours a week, or even, even less than that. It's still a fight, it's still a battle for attention and priority and the ability to be present. So how do we
Right.
fight through some of those things?
First of all, I tell you, it's not healthy for any of us to work 60 to 90 hours a week. You cannot have it all. You cannot have a healthy family and two parents who work 60 to 70 hours a week. It doesn't happen. I wish I'd have done it better. I would say that the one thing I would do, probably if I was doing it different today, I'd make sure that that my schedule was more predictable, and that when I was home, I was really home. Kathy and I used to talk about this all the time. You're here, but you're not here. I learned on my way home to drive by a dumpster. I stopped next to the dumpster, and I would visualize taking everything I'd been working on all day and throwing it into the dumpster before I went home. And then on my way to work the next day, I'd drive by, and it was always there. I could pick it up. They never dumped the trash while I was at home. So that helps, but you go into that house. I always felt like when I went to the church or to meet with someone that there was kind of like a sign over the door that said, God has called me here for the sake of these folks, these people. We have to think that way about your home. That you walk through that door, you put everything aside, say, no, God has called me here for the sake of 5 little kids. See? Now, let me just add to that. At my age now, I don't wish I would have worked more. I wish I'd have worked a lot less and spent a lot more time with my kids. I'm proud of my kids, but I missed a lot.
Yeah, and I notice even just practically speaking in my marriage, and I have 3 years where you have 35 years of parenting experience. But even in that short experience, it's been so clear to me that all it is turning my phone off, right? Stop answering texts, or don't look at email while I'm on the phone, or don't really look at my phone while I'm at home, Simple things like that. While you're physically present, be mentally present. Cricket and I, we have that conversation probably daily throughout the work week.
Right.
I understand that tension totally.
And there are recreational things that stand in the way. I spent way too much time vegging in front of the TV.
Sure.
Some of you play video games, and maybe that's what you do. If you can't play them with your kids, I'd say they don't have much value. So, yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
It just occurred to me, all 3 of my biological kids are older than you.
You don't have to say that, right? You don't have to say that right now. That doesn't help anything.
That's okay.
Let's move on. So we talked about presence, and I think there's a couple more sermons or messages that we could go into on that topic. But the next thing you referenced, which I thought was really intriguing, was this thing called permission.
Right.
Talk to us about that.
When I think of permission, when I think of the significance of permission, I'm talking about a parent allowing their children to be who they are, particularly giving them voice. If there's a thing that I've had to apologize to my grown children for, it's that I didn't allow them to have voice. I was too afraid of what their opinions might lead to, or maybe I was being disrespected. So there was this sense of not giving them permission to struggle the way they need to struggle to become adults in their faith and in their life, in the things that they believed or didn't believe, in their space. And you get to thinking about the scripture, it's amazing to me the permission God gives people to speak their mind. Job chapter 9, listen to this. This is what Job is saying about God. God will not turn back his anger. Beneath him bowed the helpers of Rahab. How can I answer him, choosing my words with him? Though I'm in the right, I can't answer him. Though I'm in the right, I can't answer him. I have to appeal for mercy. If I summoned him and he answered me, I wouldn't believe that he was listening to my voice, for he crushes me with a tempest and multiplies my wounds without cause. He will not let me get my breath, but fills me with bitterness. God, my life really, really sucks, and it's your fault. That's what Job is saying. He really is. He's not cursing him. He's just saying, you're not treating me fairly. How many times have I heard that from my kids? And you know what I do? I say, tough. Live with it. I don't care how you feel. Just do it. Right? And all my kids learn is, I don't care how they feel. That's just one example. Think of the Psalms. Listen to David in Psalm 13. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all the day? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? You know what he's doing? He's griping. But you never see God with Job or with David criticizing them for being honest about what they feel. Now, you don't see him agreeing with them. Now, that's just a couple of examples. You know, probably the most amazing example to me is at the end of the life of Jesus. He goes to Gethsemane, and he takes his disciples with him to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, sit here while I go over there and pray. And taking with him Peter and 2 sons of Zebedee, he began to be sorrowful and troubled. And he said to them, my soul is very sorrowful, even to death, so remain here and watch with me. Going a little further, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, my Father, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. And again in verse 42, right? Again, for the second time, he went and prayed, my Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done. And Jesus is struggling with his Father's will. And you don't see the Father in heaven responding by saying, come on, suck it up. We had a talk about this. This is why you came to earth. Don't be a pansy now. You don't see that, do you? What you see is this honest relationship of struggle and permission that your home is a safe place for them to become. And you're not going to hold them accountable for every word that they say.
Yeah, and I think that even starts with what I'm dealing with Adeline, who's going to be 4 in December. And it's little things like she has this nightlight in her room, right? And it's a narwhal. So she says, my narwhal isn't working. I'm like, your what? my narwhal isn't working. And the batteries are dead, and we don't have batteries. And so I'm trying to explain to her, we don't have batteries. And she says, but why? And she's getting more and more emotional about, Dad, you can't just conjure up some batteries, right? Make this thing work. And to me, it's like, go to bed. I'm tired. We don't have batteries. We'll solve the problem in the morning. But for her, there's no understanding. And so how do I respond? Is it a quick fast, suck it up, go to bed, we'll get batteries in the morning? Or is it even in that small little seemingly minute thing where she is feeling something, I have the opportunity as a parent to help her understand why she's feeling that way and what she can do about those
Right,
feelings.
right. And choosing your battles and your timing is important. Because, when my son would say things to me that were disrespectful, the problem is that I react in that moment to that disrespect. And now the issue is he disrespects me. Now he needs to learn to treat me with respect, but the best time to have that conversation is probably not in the heat of that anger and argument. See, so I see that in my kids and the way they deal with their grandkids. The issue, little kids particularly, they are masters, they don't even know it, but they're masters of making the issue not the issue, right? They're masters. And the issue's seldom the issue anyway. Control is almost always the issue. And if I'm worried about losing control, I've got to respond and not react. And in parenting, like anything else, maturity is the distance between a stimulus and your response, whatever that is. Whether it's time or process or a conversation with your spouse. So.
You said something there that I don't want us to miss. I think we need to sit here for a moment. You said the issue is control.
Yeah.
Right? And so often, Cricket and I will find ourselves getting in a discussion, right? Because she's a much better parent than I am. I mean, she's got it nailed down just after 3 years. I think she's perfect. But
how long have you been married?
5 years.
So she's been parenting for 5 years.
Yeah, there you go. She's been parenting for almost 10, yeah.
My wife's been parenting for 39.
So she'll ask me all the time, Brandon, are you trying to control her behavior, or are you trying to fill in the blank?
Yeah.
And so my question to you is, can you fill in that blank? If control isn't the goal when it comes to parenting, because I think there has to be something more than just putting boundaries on kids and controlling them.
Right.
If control isn't the goal, then what is?
Cultivation. The father particularly is the husband. That's an agricultural term. It has to do with cultivating. So the goal is to cultivate, shape character, create a culture that shapes the character of the child. Now, when the child's younger, you got to be a lot more directive in that. But the goal of parenting is to release control. Someday your little girl stands in front of a preacher and he says, you have to leave and cleave. And in my experiences, in the weddings I do, I tell the parents, I say, it's time for you to turn their bedrooms into guest rooms. Sell all their furniture. Because they've got to leave you if they're going to cleave with one another. My goal is to launch. So it's always this question of how much do you feel, because you've got fear. Loss of control produces fear. Am I a lousy parent? What's happening to my child? Listen to the way she talks to me. Dear God, what if my friend saw this? I mean, I'm the pastor. All that kind of stuff. You got to let that go. Grace is the surrender of your own power for the sake of empowering someone else. That's what grace-based parenting is.
That's so good, for the sake of the kids.
For the sake of empowering them. And God does that with us all the time. It's self-limitation for the sake of the other, cultivating them. So, man, again, let me say, I've learned all these things the hard way. I might be a decent parent if I started now.
Yeah.
We ought to have our kids when we're 75, I guess.
I think everybody in this room who's a parent understands that to the max.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So tell us about this final lesson, this final thing you learned the hard way perspective.
Yeah, I think, and that relates to control in some ways, because perspective is real. It's really looking at the parenting job from 100,000 feet up instead of from 10,000 feet. Realizing that God loves your kids more than you do. And that each one of them is on a journey, and that we cannot make decisions for them. We just can't. So I think of the prodigal son story, and I won't read the whole thing because we do want to take some questions here, but you know the story of the prodigal son where a man has two boys, and one of them says to him, hey, I want my inheritance now. I don't want to wait till you're dead. Give it to me now. And for some reason, this father does it. And he goes and squanders it all, right? And finally, after it's all gone and he's feeding pigs, he says, you know, being with my father wasn't all that bad. And so he comes home, and the father, of course, kills the fatted calf and celebrates him. Then the older brother is all ticked off, right? But through the whole thing, the experience and the reaction of the father has always impressed me. He speaks truthfully to his sons, but he lets them make their choices and doesn't bail them out of the consequences of those choices. Now you might say, well, he bailed his one son out. Not really. Didn't get his inheritance back, but he celebrated his return, what was lost, his gain. So, you know, even with any waywardness in my own children, I keep looking at that and saying, God, you are their father before I am. And so that perspective to pray for them, to love them no matter what they do. I don't know how many times I've talked to people in the church that their child does something and they cast them out. Maybe it has to do with their sexual orientation, or maybe it has to do with living with somebody, or maybe it has to do with a job they take, or, you know, when I was young, it's the length of their hair. I mean, I know guys are kicked out of the house because of their hair, right? Reminds me of the old story of this kid who said to his dad, and the dad said, you know, you're not getting a car until you cut your hair. And the kid says, Dad, well, Jesus had long hair. And Dad said, yeah, and he walked everywhere he went to. But I knew people who were kicked out of their house. And so I got to be really careful that I don't so need to be right that I miss the bigger perspective, that there's a journey going on. And what really matters is that my son comes back to me someday. And even more importantly, that he comes to the Father who loves him and created him. I can't control any of that.
Yeah.
So I think that's the perspective, comes back to control.
Control, and I also think there's an ounce of identity here, not only for our kids, but for us as parents. The question is, do we find our identity as mom or as dad, or do we find our identity as children of God ourselves?
Yeah.
Right? Can you speak into that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the reality is we tend to look at the fruit of our life to identify ourselves. Well, Jesus in John 15 says very clearly, no, you abide in me. You focus on the root. That's where it comes from. So, you know, there was a while my younger son was really interested in the cannabis industry, right? And so now you're just thinking you're having a conversation with me. Mike comes up and says, Dan, what are your boys doing? Well, my oldest son, he's graduating med school. Man, I'm so proud of him. Wants to be a urologist. Oh, yeah, what about your younger son? Oh, he's selling weed. And, you know, you can't let that determine your identity. You say, boy, I'm proud of both my kids. They're both on different journeys. But I'm just trusting the Lord because the Lord gave them to me. And to the greatest extent, I've tried to be faithful with them. And I haven't been as faithful as I wish I was. And so I want to be honest and admit that to them. My younger son, my adopted son, one day I just sensed the Lord pressing me to ask him this question. I took him to breakfast and I said, Andrew, would you do me a favor? would you be willing to tell me what it was like to live with me, to grow up with me? And what Andrew did broke my heart. It would have been better if he'd have said, you were a jerk. He dropped his head. He started to tear up a little, and he said, I don't think I want to talk about that, Dad. Maybe someday, huh? If you want an easy life, don't become a parent. That make any sense to you? Yeah. It can be a real thin life if you're not investing yourself in the legacy.
Yeah, and I think there can be so much, I'm trying to think of the best way to say this, there can be so much more added weight, guilt, pressure, shame, embarrassment thrown into all of that as a parent if we take more of our identity than we're supposed to and place it in our kids.
Right.
Right? We have to remember that just as we're giving grace, just as we're showing grace and patience and love, we are constantly on that receiving end of grace and
Right.
patience.
And parenting, I hate that who said this, but it does take a village, right? So this community can really help one another. We need to be in a place where we don't judge each other's kids and we don't judge one another because of our kids. This needs to be a safe place where we're speaking life into families, because there are families that'll come in here and their kids have been a nightmare. They may have all kinds of multiple issues and problems, and we need to embrace and love them. We need to give them permission to be on a journey.
Yeah, we've all had moments where we are just whooped to the max because of our own kids, right? Where we're just like, please, someone else step in for a moment. And what adds to that is when, it's one of those moments and someone comes up to you and says, do you even parent? Or do you even know what your kid is doing? Like, no, I don't want to know what my kid is doing. Don't tell me, right? Right? But absolutely, one of the best ways as a church that we can be for each other and for the flourishing of our families is for us to work together in this light. Not out of a, you'll never guess what your kid just did, and I had to correct them because you were somewhere else not parenting. Not out of that light, but out of a loving, hey, we all want to see all the families succeed and flourish in this church. Hey, we all want to see all the kids succeed and flourish in this church. And we move forward with the benefit of the doubt towards every family.
Right.
Well, there's so much richness and so much more to be talked about in every single one of those topics. And like you said, we intentionally want to pause and give a couple moments for some questions. So that's right now. I mean, whether you're a parent or whether you kids are out of the house or you're expecting kids or you're not expecting kids, but no matter what stage of life you're in right now, we want to just open up the floor for you to ask any questions. Are there any out there?
Comments too. Maybe you have something you want to add.
There has to be. It's kids. There's questions everywhere.
Way back in the back.
David will bring you a mic, just FYI, so that our online listeners are able to hear the question.
Hi. So I have two kids. Well, I'm Andrea, and my husband's Daniel. But we have two kids, Elijah and Scarlett. Elijah's our oldest. He's 6, and my daughter is 4. I can't remember which part it was and what you guys were talking about, but when kids get difficult and we get really tired, I think the hardest part is just to love them when we're tired, and it's still a thing that I have to practice every single night, because when you're with kids 24/7, it's just like, whoa, I'm tired. But bedtime is hard for me, but my kids just want to be with me. And so I've just been trying to just love them. And I think that's all they really need. Even if they have problems, like they have issues, they have things that they have going on, or the grandparents are away and they're just struggling to figure out why they feel sad. It's really hard for me to just tell them, hey, they're going to be back. You're going to be okay. it's just hard. And I think the only thing that we can do is just to hold them and tell them we love them. And with the thing about the batteries and your daughter, I just thought, okay, well, she's got to learn to be patient in what you ask of her. And even though you say no, you just tell her, I love you, but we'll wait till tomorrow. And it's just something they learn, like kind of like patience and trusting you that they'll still be loved even though we don't get that thing done right away. So.
Yeah, I think the perspective that Dan was talking about on that is so big. And first and foremost, like, I totally feel exactly what you're saying. Most of the time, I do the bedtime routine at our home because I'm gone at work all day. And so, you know, by the time I hit the door, my wife is like, get me out of here. I need to go to Target or the Thrifters Rock or something. I need a human, you know, adult experience. And you know, being the best husband in the world, I graciously give her that without complaints every day of the week. But even just last night, okay, I'm going to give you a little bit more detail than you want to know. Last night, yesterday was hard. It was just a long, kind of straining, difficult day. You know, you have those days in your marriage where it's like, I'm not sure what's between us right now, but something is, and it's been there all day. It was just kind of one of those days, and nothing against Cricket, or especially nothing against me in that, but so, you know, we get back home late in the evening. It's way past kids' bedtime. I'm whooped. I'm tired. I have to think about today, you know, and I need to get these kids down so that I can focus on what I need to focus on, right? Which is always work. It's always the job, not the kids. And so I get the kids down, and all of a sudden, like, as soon as I sit down, ready to think about this morning, Addie starts yelling from her bedroom that she has to go potty. I'm like, sweet, she's potty trained. She's telling me she has to go. That's a good thing. I won't be too frustrated about that. So I sit her down on the potty, right? And then it's like, I don't know, 2 minutes later, I hear her yelling from the bathroom, Daddy, I'm all done. And I go into the bathroom to a nightmare. There is stuff everywhere, right? And not the stuff that's easy to clean, the harder stuff. It's on her hands. She's wiping her hair. And all of a sudden, my rage, it's not like that I'm mad at her. I'm like, you are touching your mouth right now, and I know what's on your hands. And so all of a sudden, that comes out, not out of a, please stop touching your hands. I am yelling, like, stop touching your face. And I'm getting to the point where I'm yelling it, where Cricket comes out of the bedroom. She's like, what is going on? And I don't even know, like, in those moments, it's so hard to slow us down, but it's like, all of a sudden, Addie starts weeping, and she feels shame. She feels embarrassed because of what's going on. She couldn't control it. She didn't know any better. But my perspective of the situation is, I had other things to do. You don't know that this isn't a safe thing to do, so I'm getting angry. I'm using what Addie calls my big voice, right? It's in those moments we have to slow down and say, man, my child is being wrecked right now because she has no perspective.
And it really wasn't safe for you. It wasn't that she chose a very, very what would you say? What's the word I want to use? Yeah, inopportune moment to do that.
Yeah, but it was pure and it was innocent. I mean, yeah,
And what
yeah.
I mean is that happened at a time when you had something else you wanted and needed to do. That's happened to me so many times. Just react. And you don't realize the damage you do. You know, I think my mind's on. Yeah, you don't realize the damage you do. But the flip side of that is to remember, here's the problem with parenting. It's daily. You know, it's like married life. If it wasn't daily, it'd be easy to do. Now, as a grandparent, I understand that parenting is a lot easier when it's not daily. And so it's that challenge. That's a great story. How many of you could say you've been in this kind of situation where you really, at the end of it, you'd say, I lost it with my kids, the way Brandon just kind of did. How many of you? Yeah, see, so common. I didn't mean to step on that. I'm just saying, you know, it's one thing to be upset about what she's putting in her mouth, and that probably was there. But man, if that had happened when you had, well, I'm going to take the next 2 hours and whatever Addie needs, I'm just going to do. If you had that attitude, you probably would have been okay. We're laughing at it this morning.
You won't be laughing when your kids have hand, foot, and mouth, so don't, don't come talking to me about that situation. You're supposed to laugh, not be fearful. Any other questions? What else? Yeah, up here in the front. He's coming.
You know, it's not really a question, it's more of a comment, but I think one of the most important things that a parent can do the whole time they're raising their children is to forgive themselves. And really just put that aside, knowing that we're living under a curse. You know, we, as husbands, you are harvesting weeds and thistles. And, you know, we can't get away from that. You know, we are redeemed and we are forgiven, and there's a reason for that. So, if you can forgive yourself every time you lose it, you don't carry that pain and that shame into the next situation. You know, just let it go. I know, not being raised in the church and having raised 3 children, I can't tell you how many times I lost it. And I didn't learn to stop and let go of that control and not lose it until after I saw how God treats me. And I have an example, I have a parent that I can, you know, be modeled after. So just forgive yourself.
Yeah, I think we see more of God's intelligent design and the fact that, especially like Addie's age, 3-year-old, you know, they're wired to forgive automatically, right? I mean, they'll always forgive, but there has to be an intentional perspective of, even though they're wired that way, I still need to say sorry every single time so that they hear that, so that they know mom and dad make mistakes too. And I'm so thankful that Addie's always like, what are you talking about? Like, you know, she doesn't even know, and we just get to move on, and I know one day that'll shift and she'll remember, but man, let's be apologetic to our kids, but at the same time, thank you so much for sharing that heart of just receiving grace after grace after grace. We have to do that. Well, thank you so much just for engaging and having some comments and having some questions. Dan, thanks so much for your wisdom and experience. And I just want to say, I want to emphasize a couple things. We're all in different stages in this thing, aren't we? And some of us still have kids in the home. Some of us don't have kids in the home yet. And some of us, all of our kids are out of the home. But as Dan said, we have an opportunity as a church to be for families and for each other in ways where we just intentionally focus on kids in our church, right? Where we parent together, where the families who come to this church or the parents who come to this church know that they're not parenting their kids alone, but that they get to do it with bucos of other families here in this community. It's the coolest thing. The other thing attached to that is maybe you don't have kids in your life, and maybe that's totally cool. But I have multiple quote-unquote parents who aren't my parent. Do you have any of those? I mean, I have people who are influencers in my life who weren't actually blood-related parents. And so with that, take the opportunity to look at some of the kids in this church, some of the students in this church, and be present and give permission, right? And share some perspective. Step in. I mean, as a parent, I want Cameron, I want David, I want Raven and Haley and Delaney, and I want all of these people stepping into my kids' life so that they're getting this permission, they're getting other perspectives, and they're having more relationships than just me, right? And so let's do that, and let's be intentional.